The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gala webinar series. My name is Manuela Noske, and I'm the Communications Manager at Gala. Gala is a global nonprofit trade association that enables communication and business across languages and cultures. We're headquartered in Seattle, Washington, in the United States. And today we have a presentation by Sandeep Nulcar and Nakul Datar from Vernac Language Technologies, who will talk to us about using a crowdsourced model for faster turnaround at good quality. Before we get to our topic, I need to go over our housekeeping items. Everyone's lines are muted to cut down on any noise. If you have any technical difficulties, let me know by using your chat box, and I will work with you to troubleshoot them. If you have a slow internet connection, your audio may be disrupted. If that happens, you can use the number listed on the GoToWebinar panel to call in using your phone. We are making a recording of this presentation, and you will be able to find it following the presentation on Gala's global website. All participants will receive a link by email. If you have any questions or comments, please type them into your chat box, and we will try to get to as many of your questions as we can with the time remaining after the presentation. Next, let me introduce our speakers today. Sandeep Nulcar is the founder and CEO of one of India's oldest translation and localization companies, BITS Private Limited. He recently founded the language technology startup Vernac Language Technologies. A problem solver at heart, Sandeep is a serial entrepreneur, columnist, and author who contributes on several government and academic committees and advisory boards. Sandeep has led various language industry-related initiatives at a personal and community level, and was the first Asian recipient of the Outstanding Contribution to the Language Industry Award at the annual Language Industry Summit in London in 2016, and a winner of the prestigious Udyami Award for Entrepreneurship. Our second speaker, Nakul Datar, is a founding member and the Chief Technology Officer at Vernac. With a bachelor's and master's degree in computer science and software engineering from the University of Southern California, he has worked in the software design and web development space for the last 15 years across multiple platforms, countries, and domains. Nakul takes a keen interest in leveraging cutting-edge technologies in mobility, machine learning, geospatial intelligence, and simplifying human-computer interactions to provide a simple and yet sophisticated software product experience. His hobbies include languages, cartography, and science fiction. So much for our preamble. It's time now for the actual presentation. Sandeep and Nakul, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Manuela. Good evening to everyone, or good morning to everyone, depending on which part of the world you're joining in from. Today we are going to talk about a crowdsourced model that we developed for a faster turnaround without really hampering the quality. And I know these times are really tough right now, but I think we're very excited about our product, and I hope some of our excitement rubs off, and you can take back ideas about what we did, how we did it, and probably apply some of them in your businesses. So let's get started. I'm going to show you these pictures just to kind of set the context for today's webinar. They say every picture tells a story. See if you can figure out what story these pictures tell. I'm not going to keep you guessing too long. But if you look at the pictures at the bottom, you will see that they actually represent food, shelter, and clothing. Now in India, if something is available on the streets, it's pretty much an indicator of there being a huge demand for that particular service or that particular product. And if you see the picture on top, you'll actually see that there's something like English, Marathi. If you can't read the script, the first is English, then Marathi, Hindi, and Gujarati translations being offered on a roadside shop. Now, I don't want anyone to go back with the impression that that's how translation services are sold in India. You won't get to see it too often. This picture is from Mumbai. It's from very close to the Mumbai High Court, and which pretty much sums up the demand for Indian languages that we have today, or one aspect of it. If you just look at the statistics, there are nearly 500,000 cases pending in the Mumbai High Court. Even if you consider 10 pages per case, you're talking about probably 5 million pages, 200 words a page, you're talking about 1 billion words, and we have a dozen subordinate courts, nearly 100 district courts, 25 high courts, and 1 Supreme Court. You can do the math. So, and this is just one segment, and the demand is huge. So, I'm going to take you through how it was. I'm not going to dwell too much on the past, but things were not always like that. So, the entire translation industry, so to say, came into being in India in 1991 with the new economic policy. A country that was virtually on the brink of bankruptcy had to open up its doors for the world to come in. That suddenly led to a huge demand for foreign language translations. So it was pretty much restricted to that, because people came in, manufacturing units were set up, exports and imports started rising. So that actually stayed to be the case till pretty much most of the 90s. Towards the end of the 90s, there was a huge IT boom. India suddenly started looking very lucrative as outsourcing destination, and which is when you also had your Y2K. So a lot of IT projects started coming into India. The IT boom in India actually did something very different, in the sense it put a lot of money in people's hands. Disposable incomes went up. Suddenly salaries shot up by as much as 10 times what they used to be just a couple of years before that. So people suddenly had a lot of money, and obviously that led to okay, can everyone hear me? Okay. So there was a lot of money in people's hands, and that obviously led to a very consumerism driven scenario within the country. Suddenly people were spending electronics, housing, you have two-wheelers and three-wheelers and four-wheelers, automobiles, all that stuff. So there's suddenly a lot of spending that started happening. Now, once those markets started saturating, the urban market started saturating, the first signs of kind of the need for Indian languages started to be seen. And people started focusing on what we call tier 1, tier 2 cities. So beyond your metropolitan cities being Mumbai and Delhi, probably Calcutta and Bangalore, you actually start going one level deeper and try to reach some other markets. That's where really the first signs of demand for Indian languages was seen. The real flip actually came in the year 2016 with the launch of the telecommunications company Reliance Jio. It's the same company that Facebook invested in just this week, earlier this week. I think something like $5.7 billion deal for a 9.99% stake. Now, Reliance Jio actually was a telecommunications company, but it actually changed the face of the translation industry forever. What Reliance Jio did was it put a mobile phone in the hands of every single Indian, nearly every single Indian. India has 1.2 billion phones. It practically means that if you're above 10 years of age and below 90 years of age, you probably have at least one mobile phone. Mobile phone prices dropped, smartphone prices dropped. Data became cheaper than what you could imagine. And that meant that everyone was suddenly online and people wanted to consume content. Now, this actually led to a situation where you went beyond the urban population, the population that could actually speak English to an extent, and you entered into markets where people were not comfortable with English. In fact, a lot of the rural Indian population, nearly 30% of the rural Indian population, cannot even read and write their own mother tongue. So, as they say in India, voice video vernacular, that's the future of content in India, because a huge amount of people probably are going to rely on video rather than textual content. And suddenly we have this new reality. Now, those are just a bunch of figures there, but I'll quickly run you through those. The new reality meant that we now suddenly had to look at not one, not two, but 22 official languages. A KPMG Google report says that by 2021, there are going to be 829 million people coming online in India. And the best part is 700 million of these people, that's a staggering 90% of these people, are going to demand content in Indian languages. If you just look at the top languages, you're still looking at Hindi, Bengali, Tamil, Marathi, Telugu, Gujarati. These are the top 5 or 6 languages. The worst part here is actually less than 1% content is in all of the Indian languages put together. So of all the content that is available, not even 1% is in all of the Indian languages put together. Hindi tops with 0.55%. Currently, there are 4 major sectors that are driving this growth. So obviously there is e-commerce. Until a few years ago, no one wanted to buy online, and now people don't want to leave their houses. Everyone wants to buy online. Fintech is another sector, edutech, and the government sector, of course. There are more than 3,500 integrated government e-services, and there has been a 13 times growth in digital transactions of services. And all this needs to go in all official Indian languages. So this kind of throws up a golden opportunity, but there are also some unique challenges. And these challenges are probably very unique to the Indian market. The challenges could be common, but their nature is very unique to India. And we are going to look at what these challenges are and why they were the reason that we felt the need to come out with a very, very different solution. So we are talking about a huge demand for content to be translated into multiple languages. And we are talking about factors that are from the traditional translation process, which are actually challenges which no one at that point in time, 2.5 years ago, when we started building out this platform, no one had a clue how do you manage that volume, that scale. So when the volumes are very high, obviously your first attempt is to see if you can use machine translations in any form. And that's when you suddenly realize that when you're talking about Indian languages, the percentage of accuracy varies from language to language, and it varies drastically. So you're talking about the best of it still being between 50 and 60% for something like Hindi, to something as low as 30 and 40% for languages like Tamil and Telugu. So using MT as is not really was not really a solution. The other problem is Indians have this habit of using English words when they speak in their mother tongues. Now, what that means is a lot of words that we use when we speak in our mother tongues are actually going to be transliterated rather than translated. That's the colloquial language. Machine translations back then at least did not take care of that aspect. And last but not the least, there was a terrible lack of parallel corpora, which made building better machine translation engines really impossible. So that was the machine translation part. There were challenges on the cost front too. So typically prices for freelancers in India would range between 1 US cents to 2 US cents, depending on whether you're starting out or you're experienced. And even if you were starting out and thereby cheap, you're probably not good enough. and if you were actually good enough, you're probably not available because there aren't too many translators really on the market, and we'll talk about that in one of the subsequent slides. Uh, the project management cost was also an issue because if companies wanted to buy at a freelancer price, then they actually had to take care of the project management themselves, which meant an additional cost of about $1,000 per month, irrespective of the volume. If they didn't want to do that, and if they wanted to outsource the project management, then the cost that probably was between 1 and 2 cents went up to between 3.5 to 5.5 cents. So cost-wise, it probably didn't become that sustainable. The other challenge as far as the cost is concerned was also the fact that there was a lot of reluctance on the part of existing translators to post-edit machine translated stuff. So what we have seen is machine translation actually needs a different approach. It needs you to actually be happy with what's good and fix what's not good. A traditional translator thinks exactly the other way around. They think of what is not good first, and which is why it all starts looking very difficult, and which is probably why the kind of rates that should have come down because of machine translation deployment didn't happen. The other aspect, there were challenges in terms of quality too. So India has this unique problem where if you're good in English, then you're probably not very good with your own mother tongue because you probably went to a English medium school, and then obviously your mother tongue really took a beating. If your mother tongue is very strong, then probably your English is not very good. So understanding the English and thereby error-free translations, producing error-free translations becomes a challenge. Very few people actually are able to have that level of proficiency in their mother tongue as well as English to be able to translate between those languages. And that definitely affected the quality. It didn't help that the entry barrier for translators in India is very, very low. And probably it's low everywhere. No one really needs you to have a license like doctors do or lawyers do. But nonetheless, I know for a fact that in India, the number of unskilled translators are way higher than most places. So that was also a challenge. There was another challenge in the traditional method, which was to do with the supply. This is a very interesting part, and that's one of the major reasons why a technology-based solution was something that we thought was going to be really the key to solving these problems. So if you, I just took these figures from Prosy, which is one of the more popular sites, and there could be more sites and a little more people here. But if you just look at the top, even 3 languages, if you're looking at Hindi, for a population of 530 million Hindi speakers in the country, you don't even have 3,000 translators registered on Pros. For Bengali, you don't even have 500 translators for a population of 100 million speakers. And for Tamil, barely 750 translators registered for 70 million speakers. If you compare that to something like French, English French, there are more than 7,500 translators registered on Prosy, and for a population of 67 million. Or for German, it's 6,516 translators for a population of 83 million. So clearly there aren't enough people to service the amount of content that now needs to be translated. Unfortunately, there aren't any professional courses. There are some for French and German, but there are hardly any professional ones for Indian languages, with the exception of the state of Maharashtra. That's where we come from. And I was part of the state government's initiative. I was on the panel, and we launched India's first translation course for Marathi. First Indian language was Marathi. And that was a government initiative. But that's something that's not happening across all states, and which actually has affected the supply. The worst part is everyone's dipping into the same pool. So you take the top 100 translators or the top 50 translators, and they would be working for at least 20, 25, 30 of the top translation companies. So there's going to be a time when they are busy with something and you're not going to really be able to work with them. So how do you then manage supply? So that is also some reason that necessitated a technical solution. We also had challenges on the scale front. Just to give you an example, when we launched our platform, one of our first customers came to us with 8 million word project in Hindi, which needed to be completed in a few months. We had barely begun when we onboarded our second customer, and they came to us again with 500,000, almost 4 to 5 million more words to be translated again into Hindi. In the meantime, the first one comes back and asks us to add 2 more languages. Now, when you're talking about these kind of volumes, I have been a part of the translation industry ever since it has existed in India, and I have no clue how do you manage to scale, how do you manage to scale on demand for volumes like these. And these were just a couple of clients. We were just about getting started. So clearly, a human-only approach was not going to work. There's another reason why a human-only approach was not going to work, and that's because content typically now in modern times tends to be generated at any time of the day, and you can't possibly have translators work around the clock. There were also challenges with the project management part of it. So if you're looking at project management earlier, even if volumes were high, they were not really that high. We were not talking about, say, 12 million words and coming from only 2 clients, and there already being a need for more. And processing was still manual, it was still manageable. With the current set of requirements, we have seen that pre-processing of files on a project management, from a project management perspective, becomes extremely cumbersome because it also, to an extent, involves technical aspects, which is why the automation of that also was something that we thought was going to be required. Again, there were issues with the 24/7 support. You can't have project managers work 24/7. And of course, last but not the least, there were issues with linguistic diversity. So we are talking about 22 official languages. I'm not even beginning to talk about the dialects because there are over 700 dialects. There are 13 scripts. Even if you look at, and this is not a typical situation where you would always need to go from English or into English, although that could be the case for 80% of the times. 20% of the times you're going to need to translate between Indian languages. If you just do the permutation combination of 22 languages, you're going to end up with hundreds of language pairs. All of that scale is a linguistic challenge that really cropped up. There were also issues with certain languages. So we looked at the number of translators per million population for some other languages. If you look at the, so to say, rarer ones, you look at Kashmiri. Kashmiri has just 3 translators on Prosy, and there are 7 million speakers for Kashmiri. Something like Santhali has actually 0 translators, registered translators on Prosy, and 7.5 million speakers. So clearly, the need of the hour was to redefine supply, and we kind of brainstormed. We thought about this. How do we solve these problems? Because first of all, you have a huge amount of content. It's going to grow. You need more translators, and you need more translators on demand. So we had to come up with a solution that actually uses technology and makes this simpler. So we started with a very simple idea, which was there could be only a few thousand translators registered on a certain platform, maybe another few hundred on some other platforms. But there is a huge workforce in India. More than 65% of India is less than 35 years of age. And if you look at the entire working population, most of them are bilingual, most of them are educated, but they are not actually translating. They're doing other jobs. They're lawyers, they're IT professionals, they could be anything. So we thought, why can we not use technology to actually empower each of these people and use their downtime to make them productive for the translation industry? A typical Indian spends anywhere between 1 hour and 3 hours commuting to and from the office. Now, that's a whole lot of time that they have on hand. There are women in India who are unable to work for a number of reasons. Now, if we can reach out to these people and allow them to monetize even bite-sized minutes of their time, and if they can contribute to this content, that would be great. So that's how that concept came to be. And in subsequent slides, Nakul will talk about how we actually went about building this platform out, what were the challenges that we faced, and what did we do about that. So over to you, Nakul.
Thank you, Sandeep. So as Sandeep said, those are the thoughts we had when we started building this out. The initial process to build this actually took about 18 months, and that was followed by about 3/4 of active deployment. And I'll talk about both of those in detail in a little bit. So the need of the hour was to somehow crack this golden triangle of cheap, good, and quick, and do it with a hybrid solution. So we identified 3 components which would be necessary: the resourcing, linguistic, and technical. For resourcing, you need to revolutionize the supply. And this was by easily allowing non-professional translators to contribute, but then make sure that their quality level is consistent and what the customer expected. Secondly, the linguistic component has lets us leverage existing technology like the machine translation engines, combine that with human enhancements, and then power the feedback loop wherein we generate more parallel corpora that then makes the neural machine translation better as well. Lastly, there was the technical part, which streamlines different aspects of the project management by automating job acquisition, resource allocation, tracking, payments, and so on. Next slide, please, Sandeep. So the first component which we're going to talk about is resourcing. And I'm going to introduce a term here. It's called Cloud Factory. That's what we call it. And the idea is that when we talk about crowdsourcing, that generally means anybody can participate. But that clearly isn't what we need. What we need is an assembly line of skilled resources who can be pressed into service as demand warrants it. Fortunately, the gig economy has made this concept well known and reasonably well understood. As Sandeep said, there are people who have bits of downtime, maybe when they're traveling or they're putting their kids to sleep or whatever. And right now, that time is being spent in looking at videos on TikTok or chatting on WhatsApp or looking at Facebook. And that could be time that could be monetized. That makes people also receptive to the idea of contributing. The first thing to do is to find out who would like to participate. So locating these users and prepare a gating system that lets only the qualified people in. Next, we need to train them to see which role they're best suited to occupy in the Cloud Factory. Now, keep in mind, one person can occupy different roles based on which project they're dealing with. So someone could be a post editor on one project, but if they have good domain experience in a domain, they could be a level of reviewing in another project. Next, we also need to categorize these participants. That's important because their locations, backgrounds, and other factors will tell us which domain content they would be best at translating. Because ultimately, we want to make these folks the most successful they can be. that's going to result in great quality and happy customers. And we'll achieve this with providing regular job feedback, detailed answers to something that went wrong, what went well, give them rating and rewards as well. If required, obviously we'll need to cull the poor performers from the user base so that we keep the quality level overall that's acceptable and something that the customer expected. Next slide, please, Sandeep. The second component is the linguistic. We want to combine the human and machine components so that the sum is somehow greater than the parts. As Sandeep mentioned, we cannot directly use machine translation because that output is not acceptable in any way, shape, or form. At the same time, the human output is A, slow, and B, expensive. So how do we put these two together and make something better? Also, when you look at a translation and language services point of view, most entities in this place have been accustomed to certain concepts and tools over the past few decades. Now, these include things like translation memories, CAT tools, translation management systems, and process flows. There are different vendors, there are different services that offer these, and any professional translator or people in the industry are used to this. When we are trying to get to this promised land of cracking the golden triangle, it wouldn't be smart to reinvent the wheel on these concepts, but they will still need to be adapted to serve this hybrid model. And that's because we want to help deal with the inertia of professionals who are already in the industry, because that'll ensure less of a learning curve. But the main objective is to ensure that the speed or quality is not affected by any restrictions or trade-offs that may come with implementing these. Next slide, please. The last and the third component is technical. So how do we keep this system humming like a machine? That's something that is essential to minimize human intervention and thus maximizing productivity. As Sandeep said, we have situations where project managers are going to be looking at like a TMS round the clock if it is a traditional process, because they want to make sure that the project or job is proceeding as they expected. How do we somehow automate these things? So bringing in non-professional translators into the picture is also going to bring with it a few challenges that isn't a part of the traditional process. So some of these are, how do we break up content so that it can be edited in parallel by multiple users at the same time, while ensuring that each user is getting a meaningful quantum of work. If you look at traditional segments, then some of them are just a couple of words in length, or some of them are maybe 30 or 50 or 100 words in length. Now, that doesn't lend itself directly to distributing to multiple people. Also, since these folks aren't translating as their day job, because they're doing something else, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they are electricians, they most likely don't have access to a computer, either most of the time or some of the time or never. So these people are going to be using their mobile phones, their smartphones to do these tasks. How do we improve that? Demand for new translations can come in at any time. As Sandeep mentioned, it happens pretty much 24/7. And this is because new content gets generated, it gets posted, and then the news cycle goes on, it becomes stale. So we'll need to ensure that all available users can participate whenever they're available. So if they have a few minutes, they can contribute, and the system keeps going on. The job does not get stuck due to one or more users disappearing either. The assignment and project management process, which needs to be automated, needs to also provide enough flexibility to simplify boosting throughput, either through carrots or sticks. So when you have a job that needs to be finished very quickly, you should be able to offer things like surge pricing, like Uber does, where if there is a high demand for cabs in a certain area, there's a surcharge that gets added to your bill. So things like that. And these get announced to the post editors and the reviewers, so they would willingly take up these jobs and decide that they could probably make something else wait and finish this. And they get a monetary reward based on that as well, which brings us to payments. So how do we pay a large number of users at a frequent enough interval to keep them engaged and happy? Most of these people are going to be working, as Sandeep said, in bite-sized chunks of time. So they may earn amounts between $1 or $5 per day. Now, it will also help if these people can redeem that money once, twice, thrice a week, because once they see the clink of money in their bank account, that just makes them work more and work happy. So instant gratification is important to encourage them to spend any available time they have doing translations. And lastly, we need to reduce overheads on the part of the customer and the LSP to automate content acquisition, return, and reporting. Some of these include things like when a customer has, let's say, an HTML page, they can specify only the tags within the page that they want translated, and everything else gets discarded. So the manual pre-processing is minimized. The same thing could work for things like XML documents or JSON objects. Next slide, please, Sandeep. To tackle all of these, we designed Vernac, as I said, designed and developed in about 18 months. And the result was a web and mobile-based system. The technological solution unearths this latent supply of translators, post editors, who can work for as little as a few minutes from wherever they are. They could be out on the street, in the bus, or at home, and using just their mobile phones. Based on about 3 decades of experience that Sandeep and his linguistic team have from traditional translation processes, and combine that with smart translation memories, then we enhance the quality and context of translated content using a distributed supply of professional reviewers. These folks also have different requirements. And then there are training and reading methods that constantly work to improve the quality. And lastly, payments are all based on segments. So this is a slight different approach than the per word cost. While reporting the customer, we could still do it at a per word level, but payments are based on segments. And then the whole process is gamified for users like post editors and reviewers, so that we get more than the sum of the parts, which is we now get more than 3 times the speed of traditional translation, more than 100 times the scale, and all of this at about a quarter of the current market price in India. Next slide, please, Sandeep. Now, this is our approach to solutions to some of these problems that were outlined before. Obviously, there are going to be different approaches to solving these, and part of the goal of this webinar is to find out thoughts that you might have and how you would approach these, because we would like to see how this could be improved upon or made better for different contexts as well. The first one is question of segments. So a segment is a logical string which contains about the same number of words. This enables the distribution of about the same amount of work to every person, and then no one is going to complain, and we still get back that data. So essentially, we have to act as a bridge between traditional segmenting in CAT tools and build those up into bigger chunks. Secondly, post-editor training and improvement is important because we can't just pick random users off the street and make them post editors or reviewers. So selection has to be done through a number of factors like what's their mother tongue, what's the source and target language fluency, and doing a skill check. The skill check would, at first we thought the skill check should be just for the language, but we also then figured out we need to use reasoning skills to find if they can solve slightly difficult translations, how long they're going to be with the system, and so on. The profile creation is based on what domain or their background, and that's used for doing categorization and training. Each language pair can have customizable training modules, and those are then assigned to users at different levels in their progression. There is a context-aware adaptive glossary, and that contains terms and words with tagging for domain as well as context. So what that means is that each word or each term is going to have different relevance in terms of what context it is used in. There is also ranking going on. So whenever a reviewer decides to use a suggestion from the glossary, then they can either give a thumbs up or thumbs down. And that says that this word now is now more relevant for a certain context, such as travel, and less relevant when it comes to the translation in a different context, for example, finance. All the users who are translating, whether they're post editors or reviewers, will receive scores. They'll receive rating for each segment, each job, and they'll also get achievements to gamify the system. So you have competitive leaderboards that exhort them to do better than themselves as well as their peers. And this is something that helps people take this more seriously and also take it in a more fun way because they can share these results on their social media. Their performance is going to impact what the quality is, and it also impacts how much time they spend on. So it's tied directly to payment rates for different levels. And the system was developed such that it could be used not just in a commercial setting, but also by communities. So let's say you have a product, you have a video game, and you have thousands of in-game dialogue that needs to be translated, and you also have a dedicated community. You could just use the same system to get it translated. Maybe it's by offering in-game points or rewards. And that's the last one, which is payments could be in cash. It could be gifts, coupons, vouchers, or it could be completely voluntary. Next slide, please, Sandeep. And based on this, we set out to solve this to prove this hypothesis that using a crowdsourced solution could actually help tackle this problem and make it successful. So the proof, as I say, is in the pudding. And these are just a few stats of about what we were able to do. In about 3/4 of a year, we added 3 languages. We processed 1,300 jobs with about 2,500 words each. We translated close to 3 million words. We had 3 enterprise customers, and thankfully, they're still with us. So I guess we're doing something right. There are 3 different domains. They're largest baby products retailer, one of the largest fintech portals in India, and e-commerce. We have onboarded and trained over 1,000 Hindi, Bengali, and Marathi post editors, and they're also with us. So I think that's something else that's I think we're doing right. We have exceeded quality expectations. We didn't have a really good idea of how what the bar should be, but less than 3% of content produced thus far has been referred for reprocessing just based on quality. And then obviously we've brought down costs to about 1/4 of the market price, and all of this at 30x the speed and 50x the scale. Next slide, please, Sandeep. So there's a couple of slides about a specific case study and the challenges we encountered. So this is a leading player in the Indian fintech sector. They were one of our early customers. So we'll look at a couple of their important objectives, the challenges that cropped up, and the measures that we took to address them. So experiences like these helped us evolve the system to effectively handle most use cases we have seen since then. Next slide. One of their first challenge objectives was to have a really quick turnaround. So they had 1.5 million to be translated right away, but new content was being continually added. Since the content was financial market related, it would become stale quite soon, and thus the need of the same day deliveries of tens of thousands of words. The challenge was that the large and sustained volume resulted in bottlenecks in both project management as well as figuring out which people are online and which jobs are getting stuck. Secondly, getting these documents from the customer also took some effort. The solution was that we had an API integration developed directly with them very quickly, and we started pushing and pulling content from their servers. And we automated project management workflows with notifications. So project managers could take action only when necessary. Next slide, please. The second objective was domain expertise. So they had hundreds of documents across articles, blogs, and knowledge bases, and they needed to have uniformity and consistency in terminology across all of them. So without compromise, we had some issues or discrepancies were spotted in translated concepts, and that was because they were reviewed by translators from different backgrounds. So without compromising speed, we were able to augment the review process and make their corrections available for PEs as they worked on newer jobs in real time. So these were the case study outcomes, but overall, these were our approaches to solving the volume, quality, and cost conundrum through crowdsourcing so that we could cater to opportunities opening up, as Sandeep mentioned. Can you go to the next slide, please, Sandeep? So to conclude, you had some of these changes coming up and a sea change that we observed in India. There is a lot of changes that are going to happen in the next decade as well. And some of these trends that we are observing are there's a lot of internet proliferation with internet through landline and mobile networks. There's satellite broadband. SpaceX just launched another train of Starlink satellites yesterday. So there's going to be coverage in even Africa. There's a lot of shift towards remote and distributed services, and it's accelerated especially by the pandemic and the stay-at-home or shelter-in-place orders. And almost all sectors are exploring the practicality of remote interaction. So there's schools, colleges, corporate training, and all of them are requiring translated content. There are multilingual digital assistants. There's Google Assistant, there's Siri, and they're coming out with interpreter modes. There's Google Duplex, which you can now use to interact with businesses. And there are advances in speech-to-text and text-to-speech with AWS and Google WaveNet. There's closed captioning, dubbing for audio-video, and that's, I think, something that's going to pop up a bit more. And it's also going to accelerate fast. One article I read recently talked about how YouTube videos are not being monetized effectively simply because they don't have translated captions. The machine translation that Google does is really subpar. So one of the channels mentioned was the Stopcom, which is the traffic movement in Russia. And then you have a lot of improvement that's going to happen in NMT for multiple languages at maybe different speeds, but it's going to directly result in a drop in translation costs and professional translator numbers as well, because the cost is going to make the pay lesser. So based on that, we think that this is a good point in time for people across the industry to come together, find out how do we take the next step into evolving what the translation model has been and what we could do together. So we'd like to really thank Gala for this opportunity to do the webinar and all of the attendees as well. And we would like to see how we can work together to bring the next billions of people into the fold. So we'd love to hear your thoughts and your questions. Thank you.
Thank
Manuela,
you. Thank you. Yes. Thanks, Sandeep, and thanks, Nakul, for this overview. We do have a couple of questions. Let's start with this one, which I think is a good one. Crowdsourcing isn't new. It's been tried before. What's really different here in a nutshell? What's really different? And it's failed as well, right? So what makes this different?
Yeah. So very honestly, we had thought about this, that it's an idea that probably didn't take off outside India. But one needs to understand that if you look at India, the reality is very different. You're talking about practically every Indian having a mobile phone. India is probably one of the only countries where you have a concept of mobile first. So when companies think selling, they think mobile first. And the tendency of every Indian is to use their mobile phones more than laptops or computers. And so we know that it's almost like an attachment of their hand. And we wanted to use that model to make sure that we actually get these people in the supply chain. And from the little that we have seen over the last 1 year, I think we've been proven reasonably right.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And then next, you alluded to this. There is a shelter in place, stay at home order now for India as well, affecting over 1 billion people. Take us down that road. I mean, how do you see this new reality affect your solution? Are you seeing a huge uptake in people who kind of want to get on this because they're at home, they've lost their ability to make a living? Are you getting inundated with demands for your services? What's going on right now?
I'm sorry. Well, it's honestly too early to say how India is going to be impacted. I think we have taken one of the boldest decisions to put 1.3 billion people in their homes for more than a month. People are still talking about a GDP of 1.7, but it's really too early to say. I don't see work from home really being the future when it comes to India, and I don't think it's going to affect either our supply side or demand side, barring the near future. As in, it might get impacted over the next few months, but as life limps back to normal, I think we would not see any, so to say, impact on the demand or the supply. As in, there aren't still any reports in India of people losing jobs. The ones that have really lost jobs are from a very different strata of society. If you're talking about educated people, working professionals, that impact is yet to be seen. So it's too soon.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's just a different reality from what people in the United States are experiencing right now. But yeah, very interesting times.
So just to add to that, Manuela, so we have definitely seen an increase in the number of inquiries of people who want to join as post editors or reviewers, and that's something that we're trying to throttle as well, because we don't want to onboard a lot of people and have them with not a lot of work. But yes, so that's something that we are seeing in the short term. But as Sandeep said, it remains to be seen what the long-term impact would be.
Yeah. Thank you. We have a bit more an interesting but practical questions. How do translators actually input the text? Do they use a keyboard or is there a voice interface?
Nakul, are you going to take that, or should I?
Sure. So they can definitely use their phone keyboards. So we have Google's Gboard is pretty popular. Most people in India have Android phones. The app actually works on both iOS and Android, but Gboard works on both. So most people use that for inputting text. There's also the voice typing function, and Google's reasonably good at doing speech to text, as I mentioned before. So both of these methods are being used by users, but there are some problems with special voice text for diacritics, and that's where they will need to switch back to manual typing. But people are using both options.
Interesting. Thank you for that. And I think this would be our last question because we're coming up on the top of the hour. How difficult has it been to convince your customers or your clients of the efficacy of your model? Are they not scared of the word crowdsourcing? And if they are, how did you address that with them?
So fortunately, this isn't really a product. When you're selling a product, you're actually trying to convince the buyer that this is the right thing to buy. It will solve their problem. This is pretty much what happens at the back end. This actually is a dream situation for any customer where all along they've been saying that we and not just in India. Everyone wants the cheapest, the best, and the quickest, and that's practically what we have been able to achieve. So there's no convincing really, but yeah, we do actually have staggered pricing. We have kind of layers of service where we tell them that okay, if you just have an empty output, it's going to be about this level of accuracy. If you add a level of post editing, it goes up slightly. Then we have almost 3 levels of review, and we have different pricing models for each of these. So I think it's just about educating them as to how we manage the backend, finding out what quality works for them, and suggesting the right level of service. And that's practically what they really need to understand and know.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much again, Sandeep and Nulcar, for your time today, and a big thank you to our audience for joining us. We would really appreciate it if you could take just a minute of your time to give us feedback on today's session using the post-event survey, which is short, but as always, your perspectives and your input help us to continue to refine our webinar program. And with that, I wish you two in India a good night and a lot of other people a good day. And I hope to see you all at another Gala webinar soon. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.